us now for a look across the retail sector. Skye Canaves, Principal Analyst E-Marketer. Skye, thank you so much for joining us this morning. All right, let's get into these results from Macy's first. I mean, better than expected. EPS on an adjusted basis, 41 cents a share. Street was only looking for 18 cents. That's strong. Revenue topped expectations, topping 4.8 billion. Their forecast looks good. I was surprised by these results. What about you?
Yeah, I was surprised too. This is a big turnaround for Macy's. It's their first reversal after 12 straight quarters of poor showing, and it's showing positive momentum for them. I think a big question is going to be how much this is stemming from Macy's own turnaround efforts versus the strength of the consumer going into the summer. And whether shoppers are really still pulling forward their purchases in anticipation of price increases, and how that's going to start affecting them later in the year. They are pretty bullish on the outlook for the rest of the year compared to where they were previously. It is still below where they expected to be before the tariff announcements. So we'll be looking out to hear what they have to say about the tariff impacts and how they plan to mitigate that going into the holiday season and the heavily promotional environment we're expecting.
Okay. Yes, it'll be interesting how they continue to navigate that. But comps were also good. Comps up 0.8% for Macy's. That's the strongest growth they've had in 12 quarters. And I will say, I actually stopped in a Macy's recently, and I liked what I saw in terms of the assortment. So it looks like things are better. I mean, Bloomingdale's has obviously been a strong point for Macy's for some time. What else are you looking to see, especially as we head towards the holiday season?
Looking for more on that turnaround of the 4 stores, their reimagined stores that they're focusing on. That's a fleet of about 125 stores that they're really focusing on bringing back to life, improving the customer experience. There have been reports that Macy's stores, a lot of them have been in decline, poor merchandising, and how that mix is evolving for them. We see the strength in particular in the Bloomingdale's banner with sales up 3.6% this past quarter. Blue Mercury, which has been strong, is starting to see some softening from a pullback in prestige beauty. And that leaves the rest of Macy's, which is challenged because it caters to really a broad swath of middle class consumption, which has been moving towards the other end. We see a lot of demand for the low price, the value and discount and off price retailers, as well as for the more premium experiences. So how it can transform into a more accessible premium experience that still draws consumers without being overly promotional will be its key challenge.
Skye, I do wonder if some of the results also has to do with, all of the folks being called back to office, because I saw a lot of, kind of more just workwear, and, that's clearly a need for people returning to office. But I don't want to spend too much time on Macy's because I do want to get your thoughts on American Eagle and the setup going into its results. Now, they've had merchandising has been a pain point for American Eagle. Talk to me about your expectations.
Well, we'll be looking to hear if they've managed to fix their merchandising issues that really plagued them in the first quarter. And we expect to hear a bit more about back to school and how that demand is shaping up. Denim has been really strong category this year, and American Eagle has been losing out a bit in that category. Now they've tried to revive their fortunes with the big Sydney Sweeney ad campaign that perhaps brought different kinds of attention than what they were expecting. Now that campaign launched at the very end of the quarter, so we don't expect it to have had much impact on the sales, but we do expect to hear some questions about how their sales have been performing since then and the back to school season, particularly since we heard early reports about declines in foot traffic to their stores in the immediate aftermath of the campaign. And so I'll be curious to hear whether that was just a blip and whether they're really managing to turn their fortunes around in that all-important denim category.
I do wonder if that will be the case because, the stock had popped off the back of that news, that campaign. But, you wonder how much staying power it can create or stickiness it can create, that kind of campaign, or if it's just ends up being kind of gimmicky. I'm curious to know your thoughts on tariff exposure as it relates to American Eagle. I mean, Gap and Abercrombie raised their tariff impact outlooks. What do you expect when it comes to American Eagle?
Right. So I would be surprised to hear them also raise their tariff impact estimate by a couple of $1 million, as we've seen both Gap and Abercrombie and Fitch raise their tariff impact estimates, and that's going to put more pressure on their margins this towards the end of the year, particularly as we head into the holiday season with the expectation of more promotions. So I'll also be listening to how they plan to offset that with other campaigns. For example, they recently announced a collaboration with Travis Kelce's brand right on the back of his engagement to Taylor Swift, which generated a lot of attention. And we'll see if that can translate to sales for them.
And then, Sky, I want to circle back to Macy's just to get a fine point on that. What do their results tell you about the state of the consumer?
I think we saw a very healthy summer season for spending. July, in particular, was boosted by a lot of major sales events led by Amazon's extended Prime Day sales at the beginning of July. And I think that momentum really carried into the rest of the month and into the pretty strong back to school season. Now, it remains to be seen as the year progresses whether that demand is sustainable from underlying consumer demand for discretionary goods like apparel, or whether that's simply the result of consumers continuing to pull forward their purchases in anticipation of price increases down the line.
All right, Sky, we will leave our conversation there. Great insight. That's Sky Canaves, Principal Analyst E-Marketer. Appreciate your insight.